Commissioner Rexrod, the room is ready.
All right. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the February 15th meeting of the City of Lawrence, Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission. This is a special call meeting that picks up on 3 items that are left over from January's agenda. This is a hybrid meeting, and to get us started, I turn to Becky to walk us through the rules, please.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. My name is Becky Pepper, Planning Manager. Joining me here in the City Commission room is Jeff Crick, Planning and Development Services Director, and Ellie Mullins, who will be helping to facilitate the video Zoom portion of the meeting. And we'll work alongside the Vice Chair this evening to facilitate the meeting proceedings. As mentioned, I do have a few housekeeping items for this hybrid meeting. This meeting is being recorded and broadcast on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. Please remember to mute yourself during the meeting when you're not speaking. The chat function for this meeting has been disabled. All chats will go directly to the Zoom facilitator. Unless you are participating during the meeting, please turn your video off. This allows the active meeting participants to be seen on screen. You will still be able to hear the meeting, and when you are participating, please turn your video on. If you have any trouble, you can send a chat to the Zoom facilitator. The city reserves the right to mute people or turn individual videos off to minimize distractions during the meeting. With that, I'll turn the meeting back over to the Vice Chair.
Thank you, Becky. So to get started, a couple of housekeeping items. Do we have any reports from committees that have met over the past month?
Chair, I think we gave all those reports at the beginning of this particular meeting, so I think it'd be better to ask about these at next
next month's meeting.
Right.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Do we have any written communications from the public to receive?
All the written communication was included as part of your packet this evening.
Thank you. Written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners?
None this evening.
Written action of any waiver request determinations made by the city engineer?
Also none this evening.
Disclosure of ex parte communications amongst the commissioners for items that are before us this evening. Seeing none. Are there any commissioners that need to abstain from items tonight? Seeing none. It takes us to time in our meeting for general public comment. This is a time that we have set aside to provide general public to make comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. If you have something for us tonight in the room, please come to the podium, state your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes to share your thoughts. If you're online, please either raise your hand digitally or physically, and we will call on you in order. Hi, good evening.
Hi, my name's Catherine Ellsworth. I live at 2609 South Fir Terrace, Eudora, Kansas. I'm here to talk about the wind and solar projects. This week I interviewed a man who had planned to lease land from NextEra, and then at the last minute he decided to go visit a wind installation. He went and he immediately decided not to proceed with the lease. It was being drawn up. And it was the sound, because of the sound and the oil. There was oil dripping down the turbines and down the column. But he went back to the NextEra rep that he was working with, and they'd been texting back and forth. And he said, you know, I want to go to some meetings before I actually decide, because I'm having some second thoughts. And so the guy called him up and said, hey, you know, if you go to a meeting, we're going to just pack the Lawrence, any meeting that happens in Lawrence with supporters. If there's a popularity he said, if there's a popularity contest, we'll win it. So I got to thinking, because the meeting I was here for January 23rd, there was the commissioner, one of the commissioners who's gone, said, well, we're getting a lot of feedback to the affirmative pot that want the wind installation. So as a writer, I'm hoping that you will, I'm going to go to reading now, do your due diligence. And when someone contacts you to say that they are for NextEra's wind project, and I know they'll say there's no NextEra wind project, but technically it's true that there's no NextEra wind project, but logistically, since they put the leases in place and the diagnostics and they're so inculcated in government, you know, they're the likely permit applicant. Okay. So for due diligence, if someone speaks to you that they're for the wind project, I would suggest you ask yourself, or even better yet, ask them, are they directly affected by the turbines? Are they in a financial arrangement with NextEra? If yes, are they absentee landowners? Do they understand the magnitude of the NextEra projects? 2,000 acres on the Douglas County side that they had leased last summer when they were working on the solar regs, and with a total of 3,500 acres, the largest solar project is 3,200 acres in California in operation. And the wind project is, who knows how big that will be, but with Osage and Franklin County balking at the wind project, the guy implied to Sean, the person I was talking about, who knows how densely they will put in the wind turbines. I would also suggest that you ask if they understand that the energy will not be used in Kansas, it will be sold to the grid. And do they understand that these projects will necessitate high capacity transmission lines and upgrade to storage facilities, which will likely be paid for by the Kansas utility payers?
Ms. Ellsworth, I need to ask you to wrap up. We've hit our 3 minutes.
Okay. Most importantly, I would hope that you would ask them if they have looked into the character of NextEra, because that's what gives me the greatest pause and concern. I'm a Democrat. I'm not against wind and solar. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Thank you.
You really want to get out of here. Thanks.
Anyone else in the room? I don't see any hands online. With that, we'll move to the first item in our regular agenda. This is to consider a request to rezone. It's item number Z-22-00399. This is a 0.13 acre bit of ground on West 22nd Terrace. Requesters rezone from RS7, that's a single dwelling residential, to a commercial strip district. This is being submitted by Land Plan Engineering on behalf of John A. Webb, and the wonderful Sandy Day is here to talk to us about this.
Thank you very much, Sandy Day, planner. The item before you this evening is a rezoning, and you actually considered a rezoning request, same request, a different amount of acreage less than a year ago. And so part of the staff report included an assessment of how this project is substantially different from the previous application. The request is for just the south 35 acres of zoning to basically even up the boundary of the commercial zoning. And so I'm going to refer you to your staff report rather than do a PowerPoint presentation. The property is zoned RS7 today, and it's the south 35 feet of the 2 residentially platted lots. The lot at 809 is currently a surface parking area, and then the lot at 803 was a residence which has since been demolished since the last time you considered this request. In looking at the application, it's staff's understanding that the applicant is really just trying to position the property for future development. There is not an active application for the redevelopment of the property. There would be probably several other development steps that would have to move forward for this property to be redeveloped. But getting the zoning piece set and having a little bit more land area included in that area to just basically align the zoning district with the depth of the commercial zoning to the west is really the intent of the request. Staff's recommendation is for approval of the rezoning request, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Awesome, thank you. And do we have the applicant in the room with us tonight or online?
Yes.
Yes, Commissioner Rexroad, yes, just give us 1 minute.
Okay.
C.L. Maurer with Land Plan Engineering. I'm representing Mr. Webb.
Hi there.
Hi. I really don't have anything more to add. I mean, what we're trying to do is just line up. There's like a 35-foot into this piece of property that's residential. That doesn't, if you know where Larry North Ford is, there's a back line there, and we're just extending that line east to what used to be the Pizza Hut area. And that just gives us a little more depth so we can develop this as commercial. It's just really shallow in there. It comes up to be 165 feet. Right now it's 135. So it makes it really tight to work with that. So that's the reason why. And we've got other steps we got to do. We got to do the preliminary plat because we got to make the lot lines line up and the final plat. So there's other things we could do, but we want to make sure the zoning's in place first. So I'm here to answer any questions. Staff did a really good job on their reports. So.
Very good. Thank you for that. We'll come. Please don't go far away. We have public comment next, and we'll probably come back with questions. We have an opportunity for public comment. If there's anyone in the room or online that'd like to speak to this issue, we offer 3 minutes. I see a hand raised from Kelly McIver.
Yeah.
Hi, Kelly. 3 minutes.
Hi. I'm Kelly McIver. I'm the owner of 815 West 22nd Terrace. And yes, she is the wonderful Sandy Day city planner. So my place is right next door to the 2 residential properties, and then it's kitty corner to the commercial properties. And I met many of you last year when this came up before. While this rezoning request is much less invasive change than the last one they were attempting, as you see in the documents, I would like to request that whatever today's vote turns out to be, that you consider emphasizing, perhaps requiring, that the 240 plan's 15-foot minimum buffer yard is kept in place and not to be eroded upon, especially later when they start submitting plans and such, because those things don't always require voting approval and could potentially get slipped in when nobody's looking. So in all likelihood, future plans could be something along the lines of the version that they had before, which was a 24/7 drive-through with a double lane, and 15 feet's better than nothing, which is what 5 foot would be if down the road they try to get that requirement changed to mimic the older commercial properties to the west, where they're only held to the old plan of 5 foot. But Lawrence is headed forward, not backward, and there's a reason why there's that 15-foot minimum buffer. And since this rezoning was put in without any development attached this time, in case it is on purpose to treat us like frogs in a pot and maybe we won't notice the little change here and there, that's why I'm just looking to embed a little insurance in the recommendations to be sure to hold that 15-foot buffer yard line green if possible. And the owner of the 4 properties, as you know, tore down the still rented house they had on the residential property. So they might be hoping to come back on that too. So I got my eyes open. But I also wanted to mention, which also Larry Floatman had mentioned in his letter, I assume there'd be no curb cuts or egress allowed to let any of the commercial property traffic come through the residential lots in the meantime, just to be sure that there isn't something that gets slipped in now or in the future. So it only behooves the city to keep the 15-foot minimum buffer yard, as well as no curb cuts on the north side into residential, because that'll keep the residential lots in a better position to be sold to folks who want to build residential properties. Because as you know, infill is also part of the 2040 plan. So thank you for listening. Thank you for your good care with the city of Lawrence and its residents, and also for just having this special meeting so we could get closure on the meeting that happened a couple of weeks ago. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Anyone else in the room or online that wishes to speak to this item? Someone approaching the podium?
Yes.
Hi there.
Hello. My name is Scott Unikas, and I live at 828 West 22nd Terrace, just a little bit further down. And I wanted to reiterate what Kelly said. We don't oppose this. We think this is a pretty satisfactory compromise from what we were talking about earlier. This helps them develop the current property. The residents were never opposed to that property being redeveloped, the existing commercial property. We were just opposed to an actual commercial property fronting West 22nd Terrace at that point. If you redevelop or rezone those two properties, now you have commercial property fronting West 22nd Terrace, if you look at the map. So that was the main thing we were opposed to. So, and just to reiterate what Kelly said, one of the major parts was the redevelopment would have torn down a house that was occupied at the time. Well, they've since torn down a house that had been occupied continuously for years. So, and the other lot was a parking lot that was paved in the 60s. So it's never really been offered for development. So it's not like these are properties that are derelict or anything like that. It just ended up that way with them not being developed yet as residential lots. So I think that was it. Appreciate you guys' time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your comments. Anyone else in the room or online that wishes to speak to this tonight? I don't see anything. Am I missing anything in the room there?
No one's come to the podium.
All right, thank you. So we'll bring this back. Applicant has a few minutes to respond. If there's anything that you care to say.
Yep.
I'm going to say we're good there. And back to the commission for discussion. Are there any questions, comments from the commissioners?
Sandy, a question for you. Responding to the public comment, the 15-foot request, is that something that we're going to require, or how does that work?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. It's a very good question. The action before you this evening is for the rezoning, and that sets out the establishment of the base district of the list of allowed uses that would be permitted. The next steps in development would be to replat the property and then for a site plan. Where the buffer yard comes in, and that's typically at the site plan, although it's a component we could actually also look at through the subdivision process as well. Site plans are administrative. A minor subdivision application is typically administrative unless there is a subdivision variance. It's platted property today, so whether or not the project would have to come forward as a preliminary or final plat, there's, I can't say for certainty whether or not either of those applications would be in front of you. A site plan would not. As far as those buffer yard goes, that is a design standard that's in the Land Development Code. The applicant would have to, if they made a request to reduce it, obviously we have the context of the discussions that are happening tonight, but the applicant would have to provide justification for the reduction and also alternative compliance. So it's not that that you get to forgive or not put in the required landscaping. You have to do something that's equivalent or as an alternative to whatever that request would be. So we would look at it in terms of what is that development application coming forward. If it's a commercial retail building, that has one kind of impact. If it is fast order food, that's a different impact. So we have to look at it in that context, as well as commercial design guidelines. So there's a number of different steps that would have to be reviewed before we would know that. There's also a notification process of a subdivision and also of site planning. So property owners would be notified of those applications coming forward and would be able to engage with staff throughout that review.
Sandy, thank you.
So Sandy, if I was just going to pile on that for a second, there's really no way that a change in that buffer yard could be snuck through.
Sandy Day planning. Yes, that is correct, and it does depend on people being engaged in the process. And what I have learned of this neighborhood is that they are an engaged neighborhood. So I would anticipate that they would continue with that engagement, and we would have those communications with the residents if and when those requests come forward.
Very good. Other questions? Yes, Ms. Bunch.
A follow-up question for Sandy. So I guess related question, if in the future a developer wished to have some sort of connection between the residential and the commercial lots, would that be addressed through the site plan process or through some other means?
Sandy Day planning. There are two opportunities to address access through the subdivision process. We could, for instance, include a notation or a restriction that prohibits commercial access. We want to be careful how we identify those kinds of things. I would not want to have a note that says prohibited access to 22nd Street, because those are residential lots, and I anticipate they're going to continue to be residential lots. So that residence, when it develops, would need to have access to the driveway. So we would look at it through the subdivision plat process, and then we would also look at it through the site planning process. The likelihood of access coming through from a commercial development to 22nd Street, I think is pretty remote, that would be a desirable design.
Thanks.
Mr. Carpenter.
Sandy, Jeff, Randy, anybody, do we have to make a finding that this application is substantially different from the prior one?
Jeff Craig, Planning Development Services. Based upon the review that we did with this application, we do believe it is substantially different from the other application, or we would have not brought it forward to you.
Well, I understand that, Jeff, but do we have to make the finding? Because this is how I first met Sandy years and years and years ago. Was the first time we challenged a new application. Our neighborhood was successful because they failed on one of the technical aspects of the successive application. And at that time, at least, the Planning Commission had to find that, we made a preliminary finding based on what staff gives us, that we also find that it meets those requirements. I'm just wondering if that's been changed since the late 90s or with the 2006 development code, perhaps. I don't know.
Sandy Day planning, if I may, in my review of the language, and Jeff or Randy could correct me if I'm wrong, I did not find anything in our regulations that requires the Planning Commission to make a finding or a statement. It gave us the criteria for that review, and all of it is based on a City Commission's action. So the previous item, I think, never got to City Commission.
No.
So
well, thanks. It's probably something that was changed slightly with the 2006 code, but
could be.
But it obviously meets those criteria. Staff was really good in laying those out. My other question is about the replats when it comes time for that. Tonight, are we being asked to rezone the entire properties, or are we able to have two zonings on the same parcel?
Sandy Day Planning Office. The rezoning, yes, for a period of time, there would be a platted lot or a parcel with split zoning based on this action. So yes, we recognize that. Do we that is something we don't typically, we don't try to encourage having split zoning on property, but we also know that the intent of this project is for redevelopment purposes, and we know the property is going to have to be replatted to be able to consolidate the commercial components of the land area that we're talking about. So you're only seeing a part of the picture, even though we know more is coming with this.
So we're voting on a placeholder zoning category pending all those future steps. Is that what you're saying, basically, something like that?
Sandy Day planning, I don't know that I would categorize it as a placeholder. I would say it's a baby step in a multi-step process for redevelopment.
So are all 4 of these parcels going to have to be replatted to move the 35 or whatever feet it is from the north ones to the south ones that are the commercial?
Sandy Day Planning Office, yes, there is an expectation that the property would be replatted. When you try to, when you consolidate property into another parcel and you end up with a remnant piece, that original platted lot will have to be replatted to make it whole again. So, and the applicant could speak to what their intent is. I anticipate that they would be submitting a minor subdivision where I would have 2 new residential lots that are less deep, and then 1 large consolidated commercial lot. I don't know that that's their intent. That's my suspicion.
That makes a lot of sense. Can we condition our recommendation on that occurring down the road?
Sandy Day planning. Back in the day, we did used to have zoning actions that were contingent on platting. We haven't done that certainly since the adoption of the Land Development Code. And I don't know if Randy or Jeff have a position on that. It does. If we condition the zoning, then the action just sits in limbo. So we would have something where you would be acting, the city commission would potentially be acting, yet we would have an ordinance that maybe doesn't get published for quite a long time. And then I'm trying to review a plat for one of the questions is, does the lot conform with the base zoning? So is it easier when you get a package? Sure, it is. But given the history, I think the property owner wanted to kind of move this forward and find out if there was support before they move through the engineering pieces that are required for subdivision and site planning. And I'm speaking for the applicant. They can answer your question better, probably.
You've probably had a lot of interaction with the applicant and the neighbors. But what's before us certainly seems to address all the concerns that the neighbors had, and it's hard to believe it was 10 months ago. But it does address all of those. My only slight misgiving is we're this dual zoning on the same parcel with the hope that everything's going to work out right down the road. But that's where we need the neighborhood to be watching so they can challenge anything that's contrary to what we're talking about tonight. Is that correct?
Sandy Day planning, yes.
And ultimately they'd be able to file an appeal to the city commission, and everybody would look back at what we're saying tonight and try to make sure what we're saying tonight is what goes into effect. Is that right?
Sandy Day planning, yes. Throughout the site plan process, there is an appeal that a lot of times what will happen is an applicant will, when the project is submitted and they're notified, they will let the planner know that they want to be notified of the outcome of the project, and then that gives them that ability to respond to an appeal if the determination is something contrary to what they anticipated or expected for the project.
Thanks. I have confidence in this neighborhood, seeing who's on some of the letters. They have lots of experience over the years, so they know what to watch for. So I'm okay with what's being asked for tonight and okay with making the referral to approve it.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. Any other comments from the commission?
Well, I would say it just brings the zoning that faces 23rd Street into compliance or into more standard with the rest of the commercial zoning that is on 23rd Street. I don't have any problem with it.
Yeah. Thank you, Charlie. Anyone else? Just add one comment. I think I feel like I certainly support this. I love that the neighbors are involved and not only here to share, future concerns, but showing their support. I feel like this is a great solution to a space that needs a little bit of adjustment before it can be really the interest of redevelopment. So I'm eager to support this personally. I'd sure entertain a motion if anyone's ready to do that. Commissioner Duber.
Approve the request to rezone Z22-00399, approximately 0.13 acres from RS7 to CS district located at 803 and 809 West 22nd Terrace, based on the findings presented in the staff report, and forwarding it to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval.
The second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Thomas, you're first. All right, with that, Mr. Crick, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Barotto? Yes. Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Duvoir?
Yes.
Commissioner Hayden?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelso?
Yes.
Commissioner Munch?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Motion passes 8-0.
Very good. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for a good conversation. Moving on to item number 2. We're going to consider approving a request to rezone. This is item number Z-22-00404. This is a 33-acre lot located at 6150 Ken Ridge Drive. The request is to move from Urban Reserve District to CC 600. This is submitted by Land Plan Engineering on behalf of Diamond Head LP, and the outstanding Becky Pepper is here to talk us through this.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. And I am going to try and share my screen here. All right, thank you. My name is Becky Pepper, Planning Manager, and yes, I am filling in for the great and wonderful Mary Miller this evening. So please be kind. I will do my best to fill those giant shoes. As you mentioned, this rezoning request is to rezone property that is located on the southeast corner of 6th Street and K10 Highway from Urban Reserve to CC 600 Community Commercial Centers District. And the property is approximately 33 acres. The site is currently undeveloped. The property was annexed in 2001 and rezoned to a commercial plan development overlay, and a development plan was approved for the property in 2002. However, there were conditions of approval that were associated with that final development plan that needed to be completed prior to its final approval, and those conditions were never completed. And as such, the approvals on the final development plan and the associated zoning expired. And so with that, the property then received the UR zoning district with that primary intention that it would provide that suitable classification for that newly annexed land. This white dotted line that you see on the southern portion of the property, that is the area, the southern boundary of the area identified for this rezoning. As you can see, that dashed line does not meet the lot line because the current plan would be to extend Ken Ridge Drive, which is this undeveloped cul-de-sac here, further to the west. So the applicant did provide the previous approved development plan as the concept plan with this rezoning, which you can see here. This does show the general concept that's being proposed, but there would be more than likely some changes that would be needed to that. Since this was approved back in 2002, there have been some new standards and guidelines that have been developed since that time. For example, there is the commercial design standards were adopted in 2006. They speak to items like building orientation and landscaping and other items that would be reviewed under those guidelines. And also, since this concept plan, the property was included as part of the West 6th Street K10 nodal plan, which was adopted in 2003, and that later became incorporated into the West of K10 plan. In this area, plan does recommend that the 6th and K10 node be incorporated as a community commercial area, and did set limits to the amount of commercial development that would be possible in each quadrant. The subject property is limited to no more than 60,000 square feet of retail uses, and it may not be possible to develop the property with the uses noted in the concept plan with this limit. The amount of commercial uses would be monitored through the site plan to ensure that the 60,000 square foot limit is met. So here you can see the zonings and the land use in the area. The area does contain a mix of zonings. There is the CC 600 community commercial. There's also RS7 single dwelling residential and UR urban reserve districts, which are the predominant zoning districts in the area. The area is in the early stages of development, with properties adjacent to the subject property being undeveloped, and then the land to the south being developed with residences. The undeveloped land to the south of the subject property is zoned for multi-dwelling and residential land uses, which would be compatible with the proposed commercial zoning. And we did receive public comment from property owners to the south of the property in the RM12 district with concerns that the commercial development might not be compatible with residential land uses. The commercial design guidelines contain several measures to ensure compatibility between commercial and residential uses, such as placement of less intense uses and smaller buildings closer to those residential areas, and landscaping buffers between the two zoning districts. And then any site plan submitted would be reviewed to ensure compatibility with those nearby residences. Another criteria for review with the zoning is the character of the area. And for the purposes of this review, the area encompassing the property and the surrounding properties that could be impacted during the development of the site is considered the neighborhood. As notification of the rezoning request for future development is required within 400 feet of the subject property. Properties within 400 feet of the subject property are typically included in this review as the area. However, since much of the area is undeveloped, the neighborhood was expanded to about 1,000 feet from the subject property. And so this area, this neighborhood at its western boundary is at the western boundary of Lawrence. And as I mentioned, is in various stages of development. The land immediately adjacent to the subject property is undeveloped, and further to the south from West 6th Street is developed with residential uses, while the land to the north of 6th Street is developed with non-residential uses that include a religious institution, a water tower, and a planned commercial node. And this rezoning would allow development in the southeast corner of the commercial node in the West 6th Street and K10 highway intersection to be developed with commercial uses. This here is a future land use map taken from the west of K10 plan, which this property is located within that plan. And that plan recommends CC 600 zoning for this property in its future land use map. You can see it here. It's noted with this kind of dark red color. And the plan states, like its northern counterpart, this corner provides opportunity for a variety of residential, commercial, retail, and office activities. The commercial and retail uses will be located along the northern side of the corner of 6th Street frontage and are designated CC 600. This corner is allocated 60,000 square feet of retail space. So condition zoning is being recommended for this to include the 60,000 square foot limitation on retail space. This graphic here is from the comprehensive plan or Plan 2040 that shows the commercial map. And the arrow here is pointed to this intersection, which has been designated in the Plan 2040 as a CC 600 node. The comprehensive plan contains recommendations for commercial uses requiring compatible transition to other less intense uses in the area, having buildings located near the right-of-way with parking further to the back. And the standards are included in the commercial design standards and would be implemented with the site plan for the district as mentioned previously. And then lastly, I just want to briefly go over the other factors that are included in the golden factor criteria. Sustainability, the UR district is intended as a holding district for newly annexed lands to avoid premature development that is not well suited by infrastructure or community services. There is infrastructure services that are available in the area now, and the surrounding area is developing, and so the property is no longer suitable for this UR district zoning. Time vacant, the property was developed with a detached dwelling. No additional development has occurred since annexation in 2001. Detrimental impacts, the property is planned for commercial uses. Site plan review, which would include the review with commercial design standards and other required studies. There would be, with that review, required a traffic impact study, drainage study, downstream sanitary sewer analysis. And with those studies and the review of those studies, we'd be looking to ensure that negative impacts are minimized. And some of those impacts could include traffic, noise, lighting, et cetera. The gain from denial versus the hardship to the applicant, no benefit to the public would occur with denial of the request to rezone to CC 600. Denial of the request would require the property to remain underutilized in the UR district, which in this case permits only that one residence and 33 acres of crop agriculture. And then reasonableness of the condition. The condition to limit the retail to 60,000 square feet is one that is defined in the comprehensive plan and in the land development code, and is compliant with the area plan. So with that, staff does recommend forwarding this rezoning to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings of fact presented in the staff report and subject to the condition that the maximum area of retail uses as defined in Plan 2040 that may be located within the CC 600 district boundary be limited to 60,000 square feet. So with that, I will stand for any questions, and the applicant is also here.
Becky, thank you so much. Mr. Maurer, I think you're on again.
C.L. Maurer with Land Plan Engineering. Thanks, Becky, for the presentation. I know she wasn't working on it. Mary Miller was, but great presentation. Really, the only thing I have that I'm not real happy about is this 60,000 square feet. I mean, it's kind of arbitrary. I know what it is in Plan 2040. I understand all that. It's four corners. And you guys have put all the commercial on the north and the northwest. And then you've divided it up, whatever's left for the south. Very little for the southwest corner. And we have some on it. That's the only thing I'm against on this. I understand what all that is, but I think we will go ahead and we want the CC 600. Mr. Carpenter brought it up. If you zone it and you don't turn in something in, it goes to UR. We're not allowed to go forward with our final plat because we missed the deadline by a week. So now we've waited 20 some odd years to come back. So that's my only comment on this. We're happy to go ahead and get it zoned to CC 600. I'm not completely agree with the 6,000 or 60,000 square foot for retail. I don't understand that. This is a free country, and you guys have just spot zoned and told exactly how much square footage you have on a piece of property. I mean, I don't think that's fair to the applicant or anybody else that would come in here. So other than that, I'm open for questions.
Mr. Maurer, thank you. We're going to come back. Please don't go far away. We're going to come back to you after public comment. Is there anyone here, either online or in the room, to speak to this item? If yes, please step to the podium, name and address. And please limit your comments to 3 minutes if you would.
Michael Kelly. I live at 1123 Brynwood Court. However, I'm the secretary, elected secretary of the Coves Townhomes Association, which is the RM12 property. We're 60 families that live adjacent to this zoning request. We're concerned about the possible use of industrial and maintenance in this, particularly air compressor actuated tools provide an acoustic problem. We don't think that would be compatible with this neighborhood. The second part of this property is on a ridge line and it's above our neighborhood. It's very difficult to envision a buffer that will block out the lighting. You know, photometrics will be a problem to block out the lighting associated with commercial properties because they'll be at a higher level, higher elevation than our houses. When our property was zoned and developed and site planned, our developer was told we couldn't put fences on the rear of our property, and that was a condition. We could only put berms and shrubbery. So we've already got a limitation on our side of Ken Ridge Road that limits the amount of visual intrusion that this would pose. Plus we have the terrain poses a visual intrusion into our property. So that causes us some concern. I'd like to point out to everyone here, this is last Sunday's Journal World, and there's an article about the lack of open space and open space planning in Douglas County. The work on this apparently goes back some 20 years. And what's happened in the past 20 years? Well, a lot of our retail now is conducted electronically rather than in physical presence because we have greatly built out the internet and the bandwidth associated with it. So there's less need for physical commercial presence than there was 20 years ago when this was envisioned. So we'd ask the commission to consider that the elevation of this property over the neighborhood poses an inappropriate intrusion into the quiet well-being of our properties, mainly from light and signs, but probably from acoustics if industrial uses are permitted, maintenance uses are permitted, which is in the document. So we'd ask you to consider that this not be approved, and that if anything is approved, that we be given another bite at the apple to raise these issues again at subsequent steps in the process. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for your comments. Is there anyone else in the room who wishes to speak to this item?
My name is Teresa Hamilton. I'm at 853 Renaissance Drive. And my concern is the access for, I didn't see the property happen where you can turn off on 6th Street to get into, if they go to commercial. And off of George Williams, I don't think it should go through Ken Ridge, nor do I think you should have the access through Renaissance. It's a very quiet neighborhood. We have lots of kids. I can't tell you the number of times I've had to stop for kids driving across the street, chasing a ball or riding their bicycle and stuff. And if you go, like, especially if you go on Renaissance and you open that up and you go through, and because we're going to have commercial property at the other end, we're going to have a tremendous amount of traffic that people will be going through there, driving fast. You got to watch out for the kids and things like that. And I think that it would be better if they take it off. There's like a little indent off of George Williams now, either put the road access in from there into the commercial area and then off the 6th Street, but keep our area separate from all the commercial area. We don't have any stop signs in our neighborhood. It's just the way it's designed. And I can just see if when we get the commercial area, the people cutting through and going to the other side, or when they later on, when they end up getting those apartments in there, that we're going to have a tremendous amount of traffic going through our quiet neighborhoods that basically the only people that are in there now are the ones that live there. So if they can just make it, if they end up doing commercial, take it off of George Williams and then off of 6th Street, but not go into our neighborhood off of Ken Ridge or Renaissance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Anyone else in the room or online that wishes to speak to this item tonight? I don't see anyone else. Mr. Maurer, you have a few minutes to respond to anything that has been brought up. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
The only thing I'd like to add was the connection to Renaissance as it goes down to the south. That's a city request. The last time we came through this, as you saw on that one plan, it showed it going across and down. That was city's request to have that go all the way through. Ken Ridge was a cul-de-sac when we first did it. When we came back to the next plat, it was forced to go all the way through Renaissance. They wanted that all the way through.
Okay,
so
thank you for that.
Just a little history on why that's shown that way. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. And we'll come back to the commission. Who'd like to start?
I have a question for the developer. So you said that the 60,000 square feet was something you didn't like. What are you looking for? What is the square footage that would be something?
Well, I mean, if you look at it, I think you go 300 some thousand up on the northwest corner, 100 and some other 80,000 on the next corner. I mean, it's an arbitrary number that they've come up with that you want to have so many square foot on these intersections. We don't know who wants to come out there, and you're limiting those people to say, well, they can only be on that location or they can only be there. And I don't know what a fair number would be. It depends on who wants to come there, what realtor would like to come in, or our Lifetime Fitness would like to come in there. They have, 55, 56, or 65,000 square foot building by themselves. And in our definition, they couldn't come here. And that's Lifetime Fitness with, pickleball court, pool, all that kind of stuff. That wouldn't be allowed. It'd have to go somewhere else. And that's what I'm saying. To put those arbitrary numbers to something when you don't know who they are, you ought to at least wait until you see what the development is and then say, no, we think that's too much commercial for whatever reason, because of traffic, because of sound, because we don't like that. That's the way that should be developed, not just an arbitrary number to it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I was going to ask that question too. How did we come up with the 60,000 foot limit?
The number comes from the nodal plan that was adopted, where it allocated 600,000 square feet to the node for the not west of K10 plan, or actually, I believe it was the west of K10 plan. It allocated those nodes as part of the long range planning process that was adopted. So I wasn't here for when that number was pulled out of thin air. I can't tell you why, but I can tell you that the 600,000 relates to the CC 600 zoning district, which is the 600,000 square foot commercial district. And so just to also kind of clarity, maybe for the commission's knowledge on that one, the land development code describes retail very specifically of meeting certain NAICS code requirements. So there may be businesses that would go in there, but not meet the qualification of being a retail. So there's various limits on those about, you have to be in certain what's called a sector code in the NAICS, and the code very specifically outlines sector 44 and 45 as retail trade, 722 for food service and drinking places, 811 for repair and maintenance, and 812 for personal and laundry services. So maybe a great example would be a dentist office would not qualify as retail. Same as an office and some of those others would not qualify as retail, so they could go in there as that. But what we would look at is just going through those NAICS codes to see what uses were going in there and if they met those requirements for the NAICS codes as part of that conditional zoning. So that's in 20-1107. If you kind of want to see those differentials of what qualifies for retail versus not, and related to the retail market study, but that's kind of the numbers that we use to kind of gauge that interest on. I hope I answered your first question too.
It was an answer. It seems like there's reasoning behind it, you're saying.
I can help with that. This goes back to the big box store controversies when 31st and Iowa was coming in, and also 6th and Wakarusa with the second Walmart. It was a hot topic in the community at all levels. And when nodal plans are done, they chose this number with input from traffic and everybody else about what the intersections could handle and the amount of retail. It doesn't mean you can't modify the intersections to handle more. I mean, that's an engineering issue and you can fix things that way. But it came from when we first had the first big box stores after the original Kmart started to come in. So when Best Buy, Menards, second Walmart, all of those, it was really, there was a lot of conversation, and it was about the same time the new codes were being done. So they drew this limit for each intersection. And I have to say that kind of went out the window with 6th and Wakarusa. But as Jeff said, it came down to the details and the definition of the structure and its use. So this only limited to retail and not other types of uses on the same land. And it was more about big box stores than anything else. So if it's something that should be changed, it's going to have to probably be initiated as a text amendment to the entire code. But these are the rules we have today. It doesn't mean that the city commission can't start a text amendment or something to change that around if there's a need. Because as Mr. Maurer points out, that is one of the things, the controversies about this is it's basically you look at 150,000 square feet at each quadrant around the intersection, but it turns into first come, first served, gobbles that up. So there has to be some way to look at that, but that's not built in right now. So that's really a city commission question.
So to pile on to what Commissioner Carpenter just said, I have a question. 60,000 square feet is 10% of the total that's available for the node. Where's the other 90% committed today, or is it committed?
So that in the west of K10 plan, they did identify square footage for each of the corners of that intersection. So that whole intersection there, West 6th and K10 Highway, is a CC 600 node. And so the plan does call for the northeast corner to have 360,000 square feet associated with that. The northwest has 155,000 square feet associated with it. The southwest corner has 25,000 square feet associated with it. And then this subject property, which is the southeast corner, has that 60,000 square feet associated with it. And if you total that all up, it comes to 600,000 square feet.
Gotcha. And I'm not saying, I don't want to jump too far ahead and presume that we were approving anything, but I'm just asking the question, if we did decide to approve, is there anything that says we couldn't take from the northwest allotment of whatever you just said it was, 100 and some odd thousand, and apply that to the southeast, given the east side of K10 seems more ready for development than west at this point?
You could go through that process. That would require a comprehensive plan amendment. Those nodes are outlined as part of the west of K10 sector plan. So it's not a derivative of the land development code. It's a product of the long range planning document out there. So that is a possibility. You can go through that effort and initiate that process. And just to remind the commission is we are looking at the west of K10 plan right now. It's underway and we're getting that process started. So I think it's a point of discussion. I don't know if it's kind of all the way through that comment period, but we have heard some of those points along the way.
It's not for tonight, though, is what we're saying.
You're correct. The comprehensive plan amendment, there's not one initiated for tonight. This is just a rezoning request related to a specific property.
Very good. All right, thank you. Any other questions, comments amongst the commissioners? What else is on your minds? Mr. Carpenter.
Well, when I first saw that concept plan, my first reaction was that is a lot of impermeable space uphill from a neighborhood. So I understand that part of the process will be looking at drainage plans and all the engineering that goes with that. So I guess my real question for that is, in order to carry the increased capacity of stormwater runoff, who bears the cost of that if you have to dig up everything in a neighborhood to the south to make the pipes bigger? And I don't know who can answer that.
That would be associated with the development activity and would be part of the development costs.
Okay. And at what stage would all those determinations be made?
That would be, in part of the next development process steps. So with the planning of the property or with the site plan activities, whether that be one site plan for the entire property or if multiple site plans come in throughout the process, they would be required with each of those.
Thanks. And that brings me back to the public comment about would there be other opportunities to be heard? And there are many along this road. The rezoning itself will go to the city commission. That's a chance. And then if it happens to be approved there, if we recommend approval and it's approved there, then you got site planning, which can be challenged, can present several more opportunities for input. So there are many stages along the way for the neighbors to be involved in this process. I guess my last comment is, this has been on the maps to be developed this way for a long time, prior to, I think, any of these houses being built out there. So this is one of those situations which is, you hate to say it, it's like from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. The plans are on file in the in the lower drawer of the office on this other planet, halfway across the galaxy. But these were on the city website. They were all out there about these intersections have always been tagged for commercial development, and so I don't see a reason that exists for us to recommend a denial of the rezoning itself. It's going to have a lot of fine tuning and tinkering that goes with it. And a lot of that will be administrative, and many parts of those will be in front of the city commission to hear concerns and to fine tune it all the way down to initiating text amendments that would come back to us for review and recommendation also. So it's one of those things. Do I like it? Maybe not, but it meets all the requirements of the code in my mind right now.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. Other comments or thoughts?
Well, when Ms. Hamilton brought up about the traffic from the commercial development going into the neighborhood, that Mr. Myers said that was not on your plan to extend the road, that the city put that in, and that's what would cause the traffic to be dumped into the neighborhood. Is there any way to say it could only be, the commercial development could only be accessed from 6th Street or George Williams and not go through the neighborhood?
It'd be hard to say right now without knowing the development scheme and what's required for the fire code and the access points on that one, but I could see that being the case. There is some limitations that other developments have run into that and had modifications to do a similar accommodation. But kind of just with the rezoning, the concept's probably not far enough along for us to kind of be able to say yay or nay in that regard yet.
But downstream, that is a possibility.
Yes, MSO would take a look at that and make those comments because they are very sensitive to those concerns about, unloading commercial traffic into neighborhoods and making sure that the ingress and egress is appropriate for the amount of use that is going on in there. So that is one of their things they look at.
Okay.
And I'd also point out that the property isn't platted, so a major subdivision would be required. The first step of that is a preliminary plat, which would come to the Planning Commission for approval and another opportunity for public input.
So Becky, is that preliminary plat after like the drainage study and such, or is that before?
It would be before, and then those would come with the site plans.
I see.
But the roads and access points would be on as part of their preliminary plat. Is that correct?
Correct. Those would come in as part of your preliminary platting process. And it's also very common to see some of that kind of preliminary work also start showing up in that platting process. So it's not a totally unknown commodity.
Gotcha.
And we have talked in the past about the developer meeting with the neighborhood, having meetings with the neighborhood to say, where are you with this? It seems like that would be a reasonable expectation. Somebody should say yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
Once we have
Sorry.
We have to have a definite user for this. I mean, that's as soon as we know that, then we have a better idea of what we'll develop first and how much. So, it's been sitting here for 20 some odd years. So, it's ready to go.
Yeah, something is going to go in out there.
Yes.
It is not going to remain shrubs or
Cedars out
stick,
there.
whatever it is out there.
Yeah. At that point in time, we'll have a better feel of what they're looking for, what size building, what are they looking for, how much parking they need, whether they are commercial or not commercial. There's a lot of uses out there it could be. So, yes. And there will be a neighborhood meeting for that.
Okay.
Good conversation. Anything else from the commissioners? I lean to support this rezoning. I know there's a lot of questions that are outstanding, and this is the first step down that path, but I'm inclined to support. I really do appreciate all of the public feedback, and as well as all of the written comments that have come in. That's going to help shape how this ultimately develops. With that, does anyone care to make a motion?
Sure, Rexford. Before we go to a motion, I just want to state that I unexpectedly was absent for some of the discussion here, so I intend to abstain from the vote on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Munch. Thank you, Mr. Munch. Mr. Duver, you had your hand up.
Yep.
I'll make a motion.
I'll make a motion. Approve the request to rezone Z22-00404, approximately 33 acres at 6150 Ken Ridge Drive from UR to CC 600 district and forward to the City Commission with a recommendation for approval based on the findings presented in the staff report and subject to the condition listed in the report.
Have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Breaux. And Jeff, would you please call the roll?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Is the commission having a discussion before the roll vote?
Thank you. Any final discussion? Seeing none. Mr. Crick, please.
Commissioner Barotto?
Yes.
Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Duvore?
Yes.
Commissioner Hayden?
Yes.
Commissioner Kelso?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Before we jump into our last item tonight, which I expect to have a bit of discussion and maybe feedback, I wonder if we ought to take a 5-minute break. Is that okay with everyone?
Yes.
All right, let's do that. Call 5-minute recess. Come back, let's say at 7:45 p.m. Central. Set and ready to come back from recess, from our break.
Missing Charlie.
Commissioner Rexford, we're missing one planning commissioner here in the room. It'd be about another minute, I suspect.
All right.
Unless he stopped to talk to someone.
And then who knows how long it'll be.
Exactly.
Corner of the South Lawrence Traffic Way and US 59. This is submitted by Land Plan Engineering on behalf of the 350 Iowa Development Group, and the still wonderful Sandy Day is here to talk us through the item.
Thank you, Sandy Day. This item, like the other two that you have seen tonight, is one piece of a puzzle. The gist of the applicant's request is really to kind of move the project forward to be able to address some policy questions, both with the Planning Commission and with the City Commission. With that, I'm going to start a share screen here. See if this works. And can you confirm if you can see my screen yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
There you go.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the annexation is for 143 acres. There is no rezoning. There is no concept plan that is proposed with this application. It is just the zoning request. This project is located on the south side of what is now K-10 Highway and US Highway 59. It includes 3 parcels. Ultimately, the development would include property that's already in the city limits. The property is currently zoned AG1, is agricultural in nature. And then on the east side of the subject property is an existing county road, but would be Michigan Street extended. This is a slide highlighting where the existing utilities are that serve this property. There is, I believe, one small sanitary sewer crossing underneath the highway. Development of the property would include the full complement of public improvements that would have to be developed for the site. That typically comes with the subdivision process, identifying the streets, the water, the sewer, those components with that phase of a development. The property is accessible. There is West 35th Street within the city limits, and then N1250 Road on the north side. That's an existing designated collector street. As I mentioned, Michigan Street extended to the south along the east property line, and Highway 59. Staff has been involved with this property for a number of years, going back all the way to 2013, 2014. There's been a number of applications that have come forward rather than try to reconstruct and resurrect a lot of that history moving forward. We opted to kind of start fresh with the project for the annexation and show you what is the existing condition of the property today. The property is located in Tier 2 of the urban growth area, and then you can see where that small extension of Tier 1 property extends to the south, and that's where the project abuts existing city limits on kind of that northern and western boundary of the backwards L shape. One of the significant issues in annexation is this discussion of what is community benefit. This is taken directly out of Plan 2040. Community benefit may include, but is not limited to, some of those specific provisions that are listed in the staff report that are listed on this slide. They talk about permanent affordable housing, but also the provision of land, amenities, and facilities for public purposes, preservation of significant amounts of environmentally sensitive lands. Above that is minimally required for the code. That's a component that we actually end up looking at both in the subdivision process and any kind of site plan process that would come forward as a future application. The creation of primary employment opportunities, and then addressing goals of the City Commission's current strategic plan. So those are some of the community benefits that can be considered. The applicant provided a list of what they believe the community benefits are. That was an attachment in your packet here. I've just tried to digest them a little bit. I know this text is very small, and I apologize. The summary of this community benefit gives us a glimpse into what the applicant's intent for development is, which is a mixed use development that includes both small and larger lot residential uses, as well as commercial and service areas, as we've talked about, public purposes such as parks, cultural amenities, enhancements of the gateway along Highway 59. That has been a topic of this project, a topic of discussion of this project in previous applications. The property also has quite a bit of floodplain, and so I'll talk about that in just kind of a moment here. But that just kind of gives you a glimpse of kind of the design that might come forward with this project. And the applicant can speak to that in more detail. This property is encumbered by regulatory floodplain. Part of it is floodway, which would be an undevelopable portion of the land, and then there is floodway fringe, which is developable within the city limits, but with certain conditions. And I believe one of the questions that was floated around, the difference between the county floodplain regulations and the city floodplain regulations, if you compare them side by side, they're very comparable regulations. The city, and according to the city's stormwater engineer, Matt Bond, I did talk with him specifically about that question. The city regulations are actually more stringent, and that is because when property is annexed, when it is rezoned, we do have those additional provisions that accommodate or account for development requiring the floodplain zone boundary. We talk about freeboard, or that additional 2 feet above what is the base flood elevation that also has to be protected and preserved. So that's one of the significant differences between the county zoning, the county floodplain regulations and the city floodplain regulations. One of the things that's very different about this application from previous applications is that there is a known quantity now of what the intersection of Highway 59 and K10 is going to be looking like. In previous applications, that was still under discussion. It was still being designed and talked about. whereas there is much more assurance now of what that looks like, what kind of right-of-way requirements will be required for the intersection. The intersection from KDOT has always been an expectation that this area will develop, and needing to provide appropriate access opportunities to both the adjacent land use, but then also the interchange from one highway to another. One of the requirements that the property be continuous to city limits to annex and develop to urban standards when city services are reasonably available. That is a comment from Plan 2040. Property is not actively, I'm sorry, utility services are not actively serving this property. They can be extended reasonably so as part of that K10 construction with the interchange that I just showed you. I think the city will probably try to do some coordination to stub out the necessary lines as we can or as that's available. I'm not sure where that is in the comprehensive capital improvement plan. Sorry, getting past my bedtime here. This slide is to show you that the property is part of the revised Southern Development Plan. We have seen previous applications to revise the Southern Development Plan. Right now, a chunk of it is identified for medium density residential development. As you can see, kind of that orange striped area, there is existing commercial development, and then the bulk of the property is identified for open space. It would be reasonable to assume that prior to a specific development application or concurrent with a development application, some revision to the revised Southern Development Plan would probably be brought forward by the applicant, depending on what is the scope of their intended development. From their community benefit statement, I think they are looking at some different kinds of options. And so that's part of why I would anticipate that this would be a future application revision. The other thing is that this property has a long-standing history of being identified for future development in the revised Southern Development Plan. It's been around for quite some time. As I mentioned, some of the future applications that would be coming forward would be that revision to the plan, specific rezoning applications. So there is kind of a time frame if the applicant does not come forward in a fairly short period. I think it's in the staff report and I can't think of it off the top of my head at the moment. The property has to be rezoned. If the applicant does not come forward, the city commission may initiate rezoning for the property. Those zonings could include urban reserve, which is kind of that holding zone, or if there's a known development project, the applicant would come forward with specific zoning that would correlate with what their intended development is. Subdivision, this is raw land, it's unplatted, so they would be doing the full preliminary and final platting. Preliminary plat would be an item that would come before this body, as well as the zoning and revisions to the plan. Public improvement plans, you can see in the staff report that those were assessed. Much more detail is needed to be able to fully understand both what is needed from the municipal side based on the applicant's request and who's going to have what share of those improvements in there. And then for anything that is other than a single family or a duplex residential development, a site plan would be required for future development of this property. Staff's recommendation is for approval of the annexation and moving forward this discussion about the community benefit and how the commission wants to see that kind of framework in reviewing these kinds of projects as we come forward will be helpful for staff. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I believe the applicant's there in the room to answer questions for you for their presentation.
Thank you, Sandy. And Mr. Maurer, again, it's a busy night.
Oh.
Somebody else this time.
Oh,
Curveball. My name's Philip Struble with Land Plan Engineering. I'm representing this project tonight, just giving CL a little break. And thank you, Sandy. That was a great summary, great analysis. We appreciate working with you and getting to this point on this project. And you hit the nail on the head, and that this is one piece of the puzzle. And we appreciate the idea that we're starting fresh. This will probably have very little resemblance to the previous submittals to this corner that have been floated before. And that's part of the rationale from our side of taking this one step at a time. And we're starting with annexation. And Sandy's right in that if you look through the list of our rationale for our community benefit, we do have some pretty concrete ideas of what we want to see happen on this piece of ground. And we're going to proceed with those ideas once we've accomplished step one, which is getting annexed. We think that's a pretty rational process in this. Chances are that we're going to ask probably not for any variances or waivers. I mean, we're going to come in with a preliminary plat. It's going to be a total mixed use development. One of the things, and you'll see that from our list of community benefits that we're bringing in, is a mixture of housing types, a mixture of commercial types, a mixture of uses throughout this site. We love the idea that we're adjacent to the Baker wetlands, and our plans are going to reflect that we want to take as much advantage of that as we can. We are in tier 2. We do understand that there'll be some significant infrastructure extension requirements. We will be working extensively with the MSO to figure out and get through all the stormwater, all the sanitary sewer. We've already been working with KDOT on that interchange that you saw on the plans. Quite frankly, that is the product of the last generation of this, where they finally realized the potential of this intersection. So they took it upon themselves to incorporate the amount of traffic that could come from our development. And quite frankly, this is probably slightly less than that. So we feel very good about that. We've been working on a traffic study for this project now for about 4 months, counting traffic at various intersections throughout this part of town to make sure that we can answer questions about the traffic. We are excited about this. We've got some good ideas about it. It's going to be a little novel type of a development for Lawrence. One of the things that you will see when we bring our application in, and we're fairly certain that that's going to be within the next 2 months. We're going to be bringing in a preliminary plat. Is that we really see this, and if you think about it, that this is the southern gateway to Lawrence, Kansas. You know, right south of us is the Wakarusa River, and you're going to have to go another mile to a mile and a half before development starts up again. And so this is really going to be the southern entrance into Lawrence for a considerable amount of time. We want to do it right. We've met and talked with KDOT. I think Jeff has been involved in some of the conversations about how we deal with the bridges that you're going to see as you come in on 59 from the south heading north. As you enter into Lawrence, you're going to see our development off to the right. We want to make sure that we hold up our end of being a very welcoming, a very friendly entrance into our community. So with that, I don't think I wrote down, we do anticipate that you're going to have to modify your southern development plans, and we will be working with city staff on how that's going to happen. But other than that, I just ask that you vote in favor of our annexation request, and I'd be happy to answer any questions when the time is right. Thank you.
Mr. Struble, thank you so much. Have an opportunity now for public comment. If you're in the room, please come to the podium. If you're online, please raise a hand. State your name, address, and limit it to 3 minutes. I don't see anyone in the room. Is anyone in the room here to speak on? Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, my name's Richard Hurd. I live at 1134 East 1300 Road. I live directly south of this property. Own the 200 acres plus on the south side of the Wakarusa River. I've lived at this property for 40 years, give or take. And my concern is just about the floodplain, about this development and stuff coming in, being concerned if anyone's made any studies or thoughts about the impact of possibly, added flooding that might take place in this area. In the 40 years I've been there, the Wakarusa has come out of the banks about 4, maybe 5 times. Once as recently as August 2019, it came out of the banks about 2 to 3 feet. Clinton Lake does a very good job of controlling the water, but I've seen is you get the rain to the south, like in the Lone Star area, you get a 6, 7, 8 inch rain overnight. It bypasses the Clinton Lake and then it floods that area. So I was just concerned, the development, there's an awful lot of floodplain, it looks like, on the north side of the river. And I'm just concerned about, adding more floodability for for high rains. So just want to make sure people kind of think about that and think about us farmers that got the farmland down there in the bottoms land, because that is floodplain. And it does get out of the banks occasionally. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Hurd.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone else in the room care to comment? Yes.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
My name is Penny Von Aken. I live at 1346 East 2350 Road in Eudora. As I look at this parcel of land that's in question, I see its current use as agriculture, woodland, and regulatory floodplain, or that's its current zoning. To the west is agriculture and regulatory floodplain. To the south is agriculture, floodplain, and the river, the Wakarusa. To the east is agriculture, a fragile wetlands, a nature preserve, and floodplain. Into these surrounding natural areas and farm fields, this applicant wants to insert a 178-acre commercial development with a residential subdivision and an entertainment district. This strikes me as a remarkably incompatible and insensitive land use for this area. For more than a decade, the planning commissions, the city commissions, and the county commissions have steered development west of town and have avoided development to the south along Iowa. We've seen such proposals before, and each was rejected. One reason given at that time was the impact such projects would have on the adjacent river, its flooding into farm fields, and the wetlands that it's adjacent to. Another concern was the certainty that once we crossed Iowa with such a project, it would open up all of that area for future development to the south. And that was something that we wanted to push down the road as far as possible. That would erase our farmland, our natural areas, and the wildlife they support, and any semblance of our unique community. So I urge you to think about what you really want this community to look like and to be, and to vote against this annexation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Is there anyone else in the room or online that's here to speak on this matter tonight? Yes, Mr. Holcomb.
Thank you. Thank you, Planning Commissioners. I appreciate it. Well, I really don't want to have all your eyes roll when I bring up John Locke. Some of you may remember that in one of those first classes you had on philosophy. John Locke had a lot to do with the developing of the Constitution. And he said, land is not worth anything if you don't develop it. Not worth a damn. Well, there's another I submit to you another position. You know, the result of that has been, of course, manifest destiny, doctrine of discovery, and you can go on and on. And I think it shows up in our planning, although 2040 did elevate the environment to one of the priorities in when you concern development in of itself. So I represent LETUS, Lawrence Ecology Teams United in Sustainability, and we are opposed to this. There's not really been much of an environmental assessment done. We know the onslaught is going to begin with the extension of the South Lawrence Trafficway, more traffic, and I think it increases the problem of water, and water in itself is such an important issue, and flowing into the river is going to increase by this manner. So I ask that it really be considered seriously as far as what is a community benefit. Which community? We're losing our biodiversity so fast, it's just unbelievable. And I think that the benefit is to remain as agriculture, to remain that area as the far reaches at this point of the limits of the city. And I ask that you consider that and examine it in the terms of it having value in and of itself. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Holcomb, thank you so much for your comments. Is there anyone else here tonight to speak on this matter? Anyone else in the room? Seeing none, Mr. Struble, you have a few minutes to respond if you care to.
Thank you. I really don't have any additional comments, and I would stand for any questions that you might have during your deliberations. Thank you.
All right, thank you. With that, I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. Who'd like to begin?
I have a question for Sandy. Sandy, can you talk about the extent of the floodplain in terms of like what area, how much of the 143 acres is in the floodplain, and how much are we going to set aside? And also, what is the Mr. Hurd referenced the Wakarusa coming out 4 times, you know, like what kind of floodplain is it? How much analysis has been done about that? Can you just talk about that, please?
Sure. Sandy Day planning, and the information I'll give you is very high level, and the applicant may be able to give you more details about that. From the slide, if you recall, a significant amount of the property is encumbered by what we call regulatory floodplain, and that comprises both floodway and the floodway fringe areas, if you think about that. We have not received any documentation from the applicant in terms of what the downstream impacts would be from proposed development. When we're looking at just the annexation, that's not necessarily unusual that we don't have those supporting studies. That would be a part of the application process, with definitely with the platting, taking a look at that. And through that, what would happen is we would start to identify land areas that would be unencroachable. They could be set up as tracks in the plan, in the plat. So that would probably encompass much of the floodway, as well as some probably additional areas of the floodway fringe. A piece of that, I can't give you quantified numbers of the acreage or the portion of that within the context of the request for the annexation of 140 some odd acres.
And would you say that like it's concerning that, you know, the fact that we've had it for flood 4 or 5 times in recent history, like how much weight do we need to give to that, or how much weight has been given to that already?
Sandy Day planning, there's been a lot of issues why the applications have failed in the past. Occasionally they moved forward from Planning Commission with recommendation for denials and failed at the City Commission. Some of the applications have been withdrawn. There's really a number of issues that were associated with the failures of the previous applications. Some of it was that the proposed request was for all commercial development, and that was not a successful application. It was too much commercial. That was part of the analysis of the comprehensive plan amendment at that time. Other applications did like what this one is doing, where they broke it out into parts and tried to deal with certain components of it, such as the comprehensive plan amendment, the annexation, maybe the zoning, but not doing the development plan, the platting, the site planning piece of it, trying to move forward in these different pieces. Access and work with KDOT was a significant tripping point for previous applications. Understanding how access would be provided to this property, certainly with a commercial component, having direct access from Highway 59 was a significant design element in consideration. And so that was a significant challenge to move through. This application, the advantage it has is that there's now more known information about what that interchange is going to look like from KDOT. So that hurdle is cleared, but we still have many other hurdles to clear prior to development moving forward with this.
Thank you.
Commissioner Carpenter.
While we're on floodplain, I'll just refer everybody back to our January mid-month where we had a presentation on flooding and stormwater issues in town. And one of the takeaways for me was our current floodplains are growing, and that's mostly because of upstream development. We just had an item on our agenda tonight with 33 acres of basically impervious surface, which if you look at the interactive map is in the floodway that goes right down to the Wakarusa on the east side of the dam. So it's not controlled by Clinton Lake, and it goes straight into the river. So we can have a reasonable expectation that as we start to, fill in west of K10, south of 6th Street, this is all going straight into the Wakarusa. So we increase the risk of flooding on this property. So just for that, there's, I do have concerns about those issues with the floodplain, but I have a lot of other issues too, but I'll just stick with that one right now.
Thank you. I'd like to maybe pile onto that with a couple of questions. How is so I understand by looking at the plans, the preliminary plans that are imagined right now, that area in the floodplain near the Wakarusa, that is not meant to be developed. That it is declared open space. Is that an accurate statement I've just made?
Sandy Day planning. Yes, that's how it'll be reflected in additional applications that come forward. Yes.
So I guess a couple questions then. One, how is a declaration or a promise that be held as open space? How is that promise maintained in the long term? In other words, the concerns that are there are that we need to maintain this ability. We don't want to make worse the problems we have with water traffic. So how is that promise maintained? And then second is, if we don't intend to develop there, if that's actually not going to be developed, why annex that particular part? Why not draw the annexation line a little bit farther north?
Sandy Day planning. There's probably a couple of approaches to look at that. So how do we first maintain that promise? One, that is part of the land development code today. I can't imagine that would change in the future, that there are certain prohibitions. Thou shalt not build in the floodway, period. We don't do it. We don't permit it. We don't allow it, with very, very, very limited exceptions. And that requires a variance.
That's one of the benefits of the city's land use code, correct?
That's part of, yes, that's part of it.
All right.
The county regulation has some certain things. that are very comparable to the land development code in terms of prohibiting building in the floodway. Those two things align exactly. Other things that we can do by bringing the project, and this is more planning theory and coming at it from that direction, when we look at a whole piece of land and bringing it in, that does allow us to do a level of planning that we're able to look at it holistically. So in some projects we've seen in even some of the early projects, I think we looked at a planned development. Not that I'm advocating a planned development as a zoning, just that you can both incorporate those natural areas. So the floodway, stands of mature trees, you can incorporate those components into the design, keep it under a uniform control, all in the city, all in the county, all under a development plan, all under conventional zoning. We would plat the property. One of the other tools we could do, platting the property or the area that you want to protect as a tract. You can't get a building permit unless the property is platted as a lot. If it's platted as a tract, I can't issue a building permit for it. So there are some tools there that would allow us to be able to uphold those promises about not developing in certain areas. The subdivision process would allow us, along with the necessary documentation from the applicant, so the studies, the traffic study, the downstream sanitary, the utility studies, the stormwater studies would help us be able to evaluate the design of that subdivision to make sure those components are protected, as well as elements that are in the land development code that require protection of sensitive areas.
Very good. And of all those tools you mentioned, does this body need to or have the opportunity to condition an approval based on any of those things happening?
Sandy Day planning, is your question about conditioning the annexation on those things happening?
Yes, ma'am.
That's one that I would maybe ask Randy or Jeff to respond to, because I am not certain on that.
Commissioner Rexroad, I'm not aware of an ability to condition a annexation, but I'm see Randy's kind of getting on the call too, but I'm not aware of one off the top of my head where you can condition annexations.
Okay.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. Annexations are legislative as opposed to a other action when you're dealing with quasi-judicial and zoning. So it's legislative, so you don't typically don't have conditions on annexation or the land use. That'll come later in any type of rezoning or type of other deals. You can do that through that, but not through the annexation process. This is just to bring it within the city's purview, basically.
There'll be additional processes downstream from this where those actions would be taken.
Yes, absolutely. This is just the initial step of getting the property within the city so the city can then either do things with it or work with the owners to have things done on it.
Got it. Thank you both. Thank you all three. Yes, Mr. Munch.
But related question there. So I see in Plan 2040 a reference to an annexation agreement that would be entered upon potential approval by the City Commission. Sandy, can you speak to what's involved with that document? What goes into that? Are conditions or other things, possible terms included there?
Sandy Day planning. I am going to lean on Jeff on that one. I have not done an annexation agreement.
There are a lot of different things that can go into the agreements, and it's kind of a new one for us. We haven't done those previously, but you can include certain things about utilities and those kind of items that can be rolled into that one. But it's really it's kind of a growing document to figure out what does it look like and how does it entail and what does the promises on both sides to make it come through. So it is new for us. It's something we'd have to kind of give a test balloon to because we haven't done one previously.
Got it. And with that in mind, so Plan 2040 refers to the fact that the community benefit would be addressed in the annexation agreement. Do we have a sense of what that might look like? Would it be essentially just like the general outline that we receive in the report today, or would there be something with a little more specifics as to we're setting aside 10 acres for this kind of park and this is what it's going to look like?
Great question. It's kind of all to be determined as part of that process when it starts to unfold and have those conversations.
And is that a process where public input is involved in the development of that annexation agreement? Or is it more, we recommend approval tonight, city commission approves it, and then it's just hashed out behind closed doors among the staff and the applicant?
Sandy, Jeff, I'll jump in a little bit here. So part of that would be taken from what direction you as the commission have about what community benefit is. So when I made my presentation and I said, you know, getting direction from the commission on community benefit, that's part of that commentary that ultimately will go to the city commission, who will enter into that agreement. So I would imagine that we're going to have to draft something that will be on the city commission's agenda to receive as well, that specific document.
Got it.
Could I piggyback on that question from Commissioner Munch?
I don't want to interrupt you, but I've got to leave in like 5 minutes, so I can just make a couple comments. And unfortunately, I'm not going to be here for any vote. My biggest concerns here, simply the loss of farmland and anything in a river bottom. It's married into a family that lives or were raised on Kaw Valley River land that's halfway between the Kaw and the Wakarusa. It's plain flat some of the best farmland in the state, if not the country. And then also the flooding possibilities. And I remember that the 2019 incident of the 6 to 8 inches, and Charlie and I were on the fair board at the time, when our fair board president, his parents woke up to like 6 foot of water around their house, up on the side of the house. So I know how fast that came up out of nowhere. So those are my two biggest concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Kelso. Mr. Carpenter, I know you had your hand up here for quite a bit. I'll come back to you then, Mr. DeBoer.
No, it's very interesting where Commissioner Munch went and Commissioner Rexroad where you were. Some of these items came up at the Land Development Code Steering Committee meeting, just the last one, about annexation and these types of agreements. It was the discussion, as Jeff pointed out, is it doesn't look like we can condition our recommendation for approval on any of these items in the letter. I mean, we just have to trust that they're going to follow through and work something out with the city. We can't make sure it happens because, as Randy said, this is just about whether this land comes under the jurisdiction of the city or not, period. That's all we can do. And the rest is just, you know, there are promises on a piece of paper and nothing's in a signed agreement. And that's what the agreement that's referenced in Plan 2040 is about. And a lot of these things don't have code for them yet, because that's what's coming in a Land Development Code update, just how to codify all these ideas in Plan 2040, especially about annexation. But it brings me kind of back, the biggest issue in the past has been whether or not the city will extend infrastructure south of the SLT. In fact, one of these came up. It was approved by a planning commission. The city commission denied it, and there was a lawsuit over that. And then that lawsuit was dismissed by the plaintiff, the developer, because they filed a subsequent plan, which was denied a text amendment to update the area plan by the planning commission on a 10-0 vote, actually. So it brings me, if the city annexes land, are there any legal obligations on the part of the city to provide infrastructure in any set time period? guess to Randy or Jeff or Sandy, whoever knows the answer.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. It depends on which section of the code under the state statutes that we come under, whether or not we have to provide the infrastructure by a certain time. Since this is like a voluntary and an application by the owner, we would not have any requirement to do that, and it would probably end up being borne by the developer. Now, if this was a unilateral annexation by the city, then the city has a period of time where they have to provide infrastructure to that property, or the owner could then petition the county to de-annex the property. So there's some things like that. So since this is a voluntary annexation, we do not have an obligation by granting annexation to provide infrastructure to the property. They would have, we could work with them, but ultimately it'd probably be on the developer under city policies and city code.
Thanks. So in this situation, well, let me ask, is there anything in the current CIP about extending infrastructure south?
Sandy Day planning, I do not believe the current CIP has that work scheduled. That would be one of the policy questions the applicant would want to take up with the City Commission, and how that would move forward in a future update to the CIP.
There are some associated projects, like plans and studies that are underway for some of the other larger infrastructure in the area, but I don't recall if they have been construction funded for future years, or if that was just for the planning and the study of it. I don't happen to have that off the top of my head, Commissioner Carpenter.
All right.
I have a tangential thought on that, Commissioner Carpenter's question. I skipped over you, Commissioner Doover, please.
No problem.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask Mr. Struble, one of the benefits listed is affordable housing. Can you talk about what you have proposed? Like what do you mean by affordable? What is that going to look like? And how much of the development is going to be affordable housing?
Philip Struble, Land Plan Engineering. We envision hitting 4 housing market segments in this development. One of those market segments is going to be a small apartment/townhouse project. We do not envision that today to be a I'm not going to say it's not going to be a market or not going to be a market rate housing type project because we haven't gotten far enough into that. We have a section, and I believe some of our schematics have it between 60 and 80 lots of 60-foot wide lots, dense development, detached housing, of which our idea of affordable housing is housing that people that work for me can live in. They are not subsidized housing. That's our affordable housing component. The other 2 sections of housing that we have in here is a townhouse component. And then one of the biggest holes in our housing market in Lawrence as a whole are large lot residential. And we're going to have a small section in this development that has, a housing type where people are selling their housing and can move up, thereby opening entry-level housing for other people. So that's our idea of affordable housing.
Thank you.
To go back to a comment that I was thinking about, following on with Commissioner Carpenter's question around plans to extend infrastructure across. I don't know exactly how that process works. I'm not sure that in the absence of annexation, if a plan to extend infrastructure would make the CIP, what order those things come in. But it brings a question for me, and that is, how would this annexation impact or inform work that the city and K10 and / KDOT is planning as K10 develops. There's going to be, over the next couple of years, there's going to be some activity there as a part of preparing the state for what's going on near DeSoto. So there might be an opportunity in this window for us to, if this annexation were to occur, to take advantage of work that was going to be happening with KDOT. Does anyone know? I'm not sure who to bring this question to, or this chain of thought. I just wonder if there's an opportunity here to inform what KDOT might be doing, inform what the city might be doing, giving some upcoming known work on K10.
I know that Municipal Services and Operations has been looking into that with KDOT and having those conversations throughout the whole of the project from all different angles. So I know it's underway, and I don't know where it's at in all the discussion points, but I do know that we have had the conversations related to water and sewer service and how did those get engaged as part of that roadwork project, and how does that, make sure that timing of that is so it's the most efficient for everybody on that one. So it is underway. I just don't happen to have all the finer points for you this evening.
There is conversation, though.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
I think, just Commissioner Thomas, I think one of the differences on this annexation is that it is the landowners that want to be annexed, have this 143 acres annexed, and it is a very sensitive piece of land that, as you were saying, the floods in 2019, it blocked 458, so nobody could go out on 458. And that can be life-threatening for people that live out there. So not to consider, and I think where Commissioner Carpenter said we just approved the 33 acres that will have runoff below the dam that will feed into the Walkie. All of the development, and there is lots of it that is going out in the southwest part of the county that feeds into Washington Creek, that is really what causes the flooding on 458 and the Blacktop and on that part of the Walkie. I don't know how much more the Wakarusa can take with, I think, honest people wanting to develop some plans. And we are taking, I've looked at the map and I just don't remember now how much tier 2 quality agricultural land is being taken out of production. And I'm not a big one on domino theory. And yet, once development starts, at this point, I believe it will continue. The old, if you annex it, they will build on it. If you build it, they will come. So for me, some of those questions raise some concerns on my part. I was going to ask a question about affordable housing. That is affordable housing isn't $20,000 or $30,000. It may be $250,000. I'm not sure who that's $300,000. I'm not sure that meets my heart's hope for affordable housing when I see the issues that we are having in Lawrence with homeless people, with reports that there really aren't houses in Lawrence that people can buy. And I don't know a $300,000 house who can afford it, but it doesn't fit my definition of affordable. So flooding, taking away prime farmland, and I think it is a first step in more development that will occur out there. So I would need some more reassurances before I could feel too comfortable about annexing that land. And it is not Lawrence that is asking to go annex it. It is the people who own it wanting to come in so it can be developed.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, Commissioner Carpenter.
I just, Commissioners Thomas and Kelso brought up that 2019 flood on Washington Creek, which, those houses, there were some old houses there that had been not in floodway when they were first built, but now they're getting flooded so much on a regular basis, the county has actually purchased them to have that additional floodway available out there to help, protect other things downstream. One other issue is this has been, an agricultural field as long as I can remember, even though we've had all these other proposals, but it's still classified as wetland soil. So it's slower to drain. And the kind of disturbance that would come with any development would just cause greater runoff from this soil, which wetland soil acts more like a sponge and a protection. So we're putting more runoff into the Wakarusa. We're taking away, if this is annexed and developed, it also takes away the ability to actually slow down some of the runoff into the Wakarusa, which has a greater impact downstream. And the rivers come together in our county, in Eudora. So, anything we do upstream is, has an impact all the way down the river, all the way to the Missouri. And the greatest impact will probably be seen in Eudora by what we do here. There have been, the county's currently working on open space conditions, and I'm sure some of these items will be in that, but we don't have those yet. But it's always been an argument that this should remain open space, especially because of the flooding issues and that issue. And I'm still kind of there. If there was a development agreement with the city already about how to address issues, that might be different because it shows the city's bought into going this way and doing something. But there's been nothing like that yet. I have to say, what is in the letter submitted by Land Plan is probably the best idea I've seen yet over all the years. But I still have a problem with the type of land that this is proposed for, which I'm hearing from some other commissioners also. And Ms. Van Auken, who used to be on this planning commission. And so it's, that's kind of where I am, is do we want this to come into the city and make this a problem for the city? We're just recommending. All these issues are going to be discussed again at the city commission when our recommendation gets to them. And it'll be interesting to see what their conversation is, but I think it's our job to go over as many of these issues as we can here to help them out. So I'm glad we're having this wide range discussion today. So I'm kind of leaning against a recommendation to approve annexation, primarily on the types of soils and how this fits into the overall drainage and flooding issues around our community.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. So let's just take that question of flooding and the risks there. Love to hear from Sandy and from Mr. Struble, if you can address those concerns directly.
Sandy Day planning. Part of this area, or I guess all of this area that is being requested for annexation, is included in the revised Southern Development Plan. That plan long ago forecast at least a limited area of development that could be sustainable for that property. And then a large part of it was identified as open space, recognizing the presence of the floodplain. So that's where the land use recommendations come from in at least from the planning document that is approved at this point in time. We've talked about the regulations that are on the books talked about the documentation that is required for development. So those would be the tools that staff would be leaning into in review of any kind of development application.
Okay, thank you, Sandy.
So if I might, since my name was listed in there, let me address the floodplain issues, if I may. To start with, the Southern Development Plan and what it shows for open space, we will be coming back and requesting a significant change to that and requesting a larger portion of that be developed. Sandy was absolutely correct in everything she said, and I want to focus on one thing. If you keep in mind, we continue to refer to we cannot develop in the floodway, period. And that's shown on that plan and that map Sandy had in there, and it shows the difference between the floodplain or the floodway and the floodplain. And so the floodway section that cuts through our property, which is still is a significant part of it, we have no choice. You don't have the ability to give us permission to develop in the floodway. There's no way you can do that. We can't do it. We will not be doing it. However, outside of the floodway is what's called the floodway fringe. And that will be the area that we will be filling and attempting to put some development in that. And that will be the part of the Southern Development Plan that we'll be asking to change, showing that we're going to develop that. Now, in that process, for us to get permission to develop in the floodway fringe, we have to go through the City of Lawrence and the MSO and the City of Lawrence criteria for us developing in that. And we have to go through the state of Kansas, and we have to go through FEMA. All those agencies have to give us permission to allow us to fill in that area. Each one of them has their own set of criteria that we have to adhere to. FEMA currently just came out with some requirements, and we now have to do as many as 4 independent hydraulic models of what's going to happen on that section of the floodplain based on what we're going to do. And those models have to show what is called a no-rise situation. Now, a no-rise situation just is the hydraulic model based on what FEMA makes all their decisions on, that model will not show an increase. And that's one of their criteria. It doesn't say anything about what's going to happen on Washington Creek. It doesn't say anything that we're not going to have a flooding event that's going to top the road again at some future point in time like it did in 2019. I mean, I live out by Washington Creek. I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, we were stranded for a half a day and couldn't get out. So I got firsthand experience with that. But the point I want to make, and the reason we're asking for annexation right now, and you giving us permission to go to the city commission and ask for annexation on this piece of property doesn't give us permission to flood anything. It doesn't give us permission to vacate any of those requirements that already exist. It just gives us a starting point to do that. We're going to go through all those studies. But we prefer to have this step out of the way. Those studies are fairly onerous. We don't have any choice. We have all these other agencies that get to approve them. So you don't even have that ability to waive FEMA requirements, state of Kansas requirements, if you wanted to. But so I'm a little bit at a loss on why we're having this detailed of a conversation about flooding and everything just because we're asking for annexation, because we have to get all those permissions down the road. Now you could, and I'm going to just throw this out there. If you prefer, I'd prefer you didn't, but you could defer our annexation until we bring in all those studies. We're still going to go to the city commission and see if they'll give us an annexation anyway. I think one of the significant comments that has been made tonight has been about the annexation is that something is going to happen on this property. And MSO needs to know that. KDOT needs to know that. I believe in the capital improvements plan, there is some money that's going to increase some of the sewer lines that go along the South Lawrence traffic way that's going to be the recipient of our wastewater. And that is because they're anticipating some development on this property. That's a benefit to us. That's probably about the only thing about our project that we're not paying for. I mean, we're not here asking the city to pay for anything. We have to extend a fire protection water line under the SLT at two different locations, at Michigan Street and Iowa Street, and loop that line through. That's on us. We have to put in our own wastewater treatment or pumping station and pump up into the city's system. That's on us. We're not asking the city to participate in that. All the streets in our development, we're paying for. So there's no at-risk dollars for the city in any of our requests. I just think with the level of protections and the level of things that we have to go through, no, they're not guarantees that none of these other events are never going to happen again, because they probably will. But we have all these other requirements we have to go through to answer to other people, both on wastewater, fire protection, and stormwater and traffic. That's really why we're here, just simply asking for annexation, because we want to get started on all those issues. But we want to know that you want us to be in the city. Now I'm just going to be bold enough to say that if you don't want to annex this piece of property into the city because you want to protect prime farmland, then vote not to annex us. Okay, that's fine. But to make arguments about that the 33 acres at 6th and SLT is eventually going to get downstream of Clinton Lake and it is eventually going to get to our property and cause a flooding problem. No, let's don't make those kind of arguments, because they're disingenuous.
Right. Mr. Struble, thank you.
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the commission? Questions? Yes, Commissioner Hayden.
I think I just want to say for the record that I'm leaning against this because of the prime farmland issue and the soil issues. So I just wanted to get that on the record, since there were a lot of different reasons that were thrown out there.
Gotcha. Thank you, Commissioner. We have a couple thoughts that I'd like to share on this. Let's listen to the different discussions. There's my perspective, just one person's perspective. Our need for developable land is real and present. It shows up in housing costs that, based on what's happening east of us, is likely going to grow worse quickly. We're surrounded by floodplain as a community. We're going to come up against these questions in almost every direction that we think about expansion. And being able to manage that, it's going to be something that we're going to need to deal with. I'm leaning actually in favor of supporting the annexation because I recognize, or I believe, that there is a need for buildable, developable ground. That in this particular case, even though it's just an idea on paper, that the idea of a mixed use kind of a community being built out there would be an advantage. The location of this and where this sits, I think the argument that this is a gateway to the South Lawrence coming up 59 into the south part of town, I think that's a real consideration. Its proximity on that intersection of those two roads to what it feeds to the developments that are going to be going out east. And then I guess lastly, it's a belief that whether we say yes now or we say yes. Whether we say yes now or not, I think my sense is that this ground is ultimately going to continue to come back for development. And if K10, and we know that it is, if as K10 develops, if this represents the opportunity for us to extend infrastructure south, now would be the time for us to take advantage of that, rather than doing it at a more expensive time after that road had been developed. So just a mix of different ideas that I have. I absolutely give weight to and appreciation to the fact that there is some really valuable farm ground out there. I'm not insensitive to that at all. I'm very concerned about the potential for flooding. And it seems to me to be a larger issue. It seems to me to be that this is the location where all of the other things have shown up in terms of a flooding problem. And I trust that there are processes, there are steps, there are things that will be done between now and then before the first shovel of dirt is turned, that's going to give our city the opportunity to look at that once it is in fact a part of our incorporated space. So those are my general thoughts. I'm inclined to support the annexation largely because I think at some point we're going to be there, and the timing, in my opinion, is probably better now than later. Sure, open to other thoughts.
Yeah, I brought up the 33 acres just to show everything's connected. You know, not that there's going to be a direct increase of flooding on this property by that, but every bit of land we cover upstream will have an effect downstream. What the effect is there, I have no idea. That's what all the state and federal regulatory authorities have their planning for, as was outlined by Mr. Struble. And I thank him for outlining all those facts and studies that have to be done. To me, it's whether or not this commission, as a commission, we're going to have a mixed vote. We already know that. And all that really does is it gives information to the city commission, which is going to make the ultimate vote, and it's going to give them information. If we vote no, it doesn't mean it's done. It means it goes to the city commission with a recommendation for denial, which may change how many people have to vote in favor of it. That's it. All the arguments will be made there. And my bigger point is, I think we need a better plan before we consider annexing this land. And maybe our plan is going to be down the road that we skip the floodway on both sides of the Wakarusa, and we have to know the city's ready to skip over that area. The same thing's coming up with the Wakarusa extension, where the city doesn't want to participate in funding a road across the Wakarusa out in the southwest, but the county sees a need for it. So there's a conflict right there. But we need a plan. We don't have a plan. We have an old plan that we know is scheduled to be updated, which is part of the reason the last one that came to us ran into problems, because it wanted to piecemeal update a plan before there was the fuller conversation. So we're back to the same point. If the city commission wants to come up with an annexation agreement and then approve it, that's up to them. But where I'm sitting here today, with the knowledge we have, I'm not inclined to recommend approval of annexation at this time for all the reasons that have been stated here.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. Any other comments before we consider a motion? I want to make sure everybody's had an opportunity to weigh in. Commissioner Munch.
Thank you, Chair. I have, I guess, ultimately mixed feelings on this. I do have significant concerns about what the development would ultimately look like here. And as Commissioner Carpenter noted, we really don't have details as to what we're looking at with respect to how much of this area is going to be developed. We don't know exactly what's going to be there. I'm concerned about what the specific nature of the community benefit to be provided might be. But so I guess I'm struggling with on one hand, not having answers to these questions, but then on the other hand, having some confidence or hope that these will be worked out further on down the road in the process, and that there are appropriate channels in place to ensure that these are resolved appropriately. I guess ultimately I focus on the fact that, as Sandy mentioned, this area has, I guess, always been contemplated as an area that will be developed. And I think with that in mind, I'm inclined to support this proposal, but I do want to note for the record and for the City Commission's consideration that there are still outstanding concerns about what all this might entail in what might go into that annexation agreement once that is put into place.
Thank you, Commissioner. Anyone else care to share thoughts before we ask for a motion? Would anyone care to make a motion?
I'll make one.
Thank you, Commissioner Duber.
I make a motion that we approve the annexation request A22-00403 of approximately 143.41 acres located in the southeast corner of SLT and US 59, and forward the request to the City Commission with a recommendation to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second? Commissioner Munch seconds. All right. Discussion before we call for a vote. I'll just restate a couple comments that I'd made earlier. I do intend to support this. I do believe that development in this area is in our future. My sense is that given the pending work on K10, the time to develop that infrastructure south towards this area is better now than after that road work has been completed. I'll just use the word trust that the number of processes that have been outlined throughout the course of this conversation regards the concerns on flooding, that those will address the real risks that are faced as those continuing development processes occur. Any other comments? Jeff, could you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Barroto? No. Commissioner Carpenter?
No.
Commissioner Duvar?
Yes.
Commissioner Hayden?
No.
Commissioner Munch?
Yes.
Commissioner Rexrod?
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas?
No.
Motion fails 3-4.
So at this point, Jeff, do we pause and send forward a failed motion to approve, or do we need to go back and have another vote, another motion and a second and a vote on a denial?
It would be another vote, or excuse me, another motion for consideration, because at this point, the commission has not made a motion to send anything.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Does anyone care to make a second motion on this matter? We tried the approval. That was voted down. We seem stuck.
Will this not send the message anyway that the vote was 4-3? Would that not send the same message rather than having to have a vote to deny? What would be the purpose of that?
It would be the recommendation of the board at that point. If you recommend forwarding a denial versus you failed to recommend a approval at that point. So there still has to be a vote to go the other direction if that's the board's choice to make sure that is conveyed. Because right now the commission is not relayed anything with the vote at this point.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. Yes, at this point in time, it would go to the City Commission with no recommendation whatsoever.
I'll do it once it reopens on my other computer here. But I don't have it in front of me at the moment. That's how I'm going to scramble it.
All right. Let us know when you're ready, Jim.
Yeah. This is when it chooses to go slow, of course.
Of course. It's asking you to reconsider your position, I think, Jim.
Oh, okay. Good grief. Okay, it's never going to open.
So you say it's not opening for you?
Oh, it's working on it. It's the little blue bar is almost to the other end.
Okay.
All right. All right, I would make a motion to recommend denial of the requested annexation of approximately 143.41 acres based on the findings in the staff report, discussion of the Planning Commission, and forwarding the recommendation of denial to the City Commission.
Thank you, Commissioner Carpenter. Have a second, please. Commissioner Thomas, thank you. Any discussion before we call the roll? Thank you. Mr. Crick, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Barota? Yes. Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Duvar?
No.
Commissioner Hayden?
Yes.
Commissioner Munch?
No.
Commissioner Rexroad?
No.
Commissioner Thomas?
Yes.
Sorry, give me one moment. I've forgot how to do math instantaneously here. Motion passes 4-3.
4-3. Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. Folks, this was a very thoughtful, well done discussion. As Commissioner Carpenter pointed out, we're a recommending body, and our job isn't necessarily to get to consensus. It is, in fact, to suss out the issues so that the policymakers are able to make a better informed decision. And I think we accomplished that goal tonight. So appreciate you and all the serious work and thought that you put into this. Before we call for adjournment, is there any other business before the commission tonight?
None this evening.
With
just to be clear, we're back again next Wednesday night.
Yes, we are for our February meeting.
Correct. You will have your normal scheduled February meeting next week. And just as a reminder, the commission, Monday is a holiday for the city, so you will have the Wednesday meeting. And so
it's a doozy. So stay caffeinated and well nourished. All right. Can I have a motion to adjourn, please?
So moved.
Second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Jeff, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Barota? Yes. Commissioner Carpenter?
Yes.
Commissioner Duvar?
Yes.
Commissioner Hayden?
Yes.
Commissioner Munch,
Yes.
Commissioner Rexroad,
Yes.
Commissioner Thomas.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you all. Have a good night.